Chili, listen. Chrisean. Girl. If you thought this Ronny Doe situation was gonna quietly disappear into the algorithm, honey, you need to sit all the way down because Chrisean Rock just went on Instagram Live and did the one thing every defense attorney in America begs their client not to do. She started talking. And once Chrisean Rock starts talking, she doesn't stop until the whole world is holding a receipt she didn't mean to hand out. 17 months. That is how long detectives in Anne Arundel County, Maryland have been sitting on the Karon McCain murder file. 17 months of no arrests, no charges, no closure, and no answers for a family that is still asking the same question they were asking on February 3, 2025. Who killed the man the internet knew as Ronny Doe? And now, out of nowhere, the woman whose name has been circling this case since the first candle was lit hops on live in the middle of a workout and tells her audience that investigators pulled up on her midweek at the gym to personally tell her she's cleared. Baby, something in that math is not mathing, and I'ma break it all down. Hit that subscribe button and slap the bell because the words Chrisean Rock chose on that live are not the story. It is the words she skipped over that are about to unravel this entire situation. Ride with me all the way to the end because there are layers on layers on layers here, and by the time we finish, you are gonna see this case the way the detectives see it. Let me set the frame, cold and clean, so we all know where we are standing. Chrisean Malone, born Chrisean Malone Sr., hopped onto Instagram Live in late July 2026 to address the death of Karon McCain, a 24-year-old Baltimore man the internet had come to know as Ronny Doe. Karon McCain was found with multiple gunshot wounds outside a house in Severn, Maryland on the evening of February 3, 2025. Anne Arundel County Police pronounced him dead at 7:10 p.m. that night. The case remains open. 17 months later, no one has been arrested, no one has been charged, and according to police statements to TMZ dated July 31, 2026, the investigation is still active. Now, before we watch Chrisean Rock's words fall apart in real time, we need to actually understand who Karon McCain was, because the internet flattened him into a footnote, and that flattening is a huge piece of why this story keeps twisting. Karon McCain was not some anonymous name that materialized in a headline the week he died. Karon was a Baltimore figure, and Baltimore is the city that raised Chrisean Rock, the city she has repped in every era of her career even after the Hollywood money came in. Karon and Chrisean Rock had been in the same orbit for years. Friends first, according to multiple neighborhood sources. Then something more. Then something public. Then something ugly. By late 2024, Karon McCain had built a small but loud online presence of his own, and the engine of that presence, the single thing that kept Karon's name circulating on every hip-hop blog on the East Coast, was one repeated demand. A paternity test. Karon believed, and said so on camera more than once, that the child the world knew as Blueface and Chrisean Rock's son, Little Chrisean Jr., might actually be his biological son. That is the axis this whole situation spins on. Not the murder. The question underneath the murder. And you have to clock the environment Karon McCain was standing in when he was making that demand. The streets of Baltimore do not play about reputations. A man publicly claiming paternity of a famous woman's child is making two moves at the same time. He is challenging a celebrity's entire narrative, and he is embarrassing another man, a man with money, with reach, and with a widely reported history of violence-adjacent legal trouble. Blueface, government name Jonathan Michael Porter, has spent the last several years cycling in and out of courtrooms and custody, from the Las Vegas shooting case that shadowed him for years to the probation violations that eventually put him behind bars in 2024. That is the backdrop. That is the room Karon was shouting his DNA demand into. When Karon McCain asked for that test, he was not just asking a lab question. He was stepping on the single storyline holding an entire content empire upright. Keep that in your back pocket, because we are coming right back to it. Now watch how the pieces refuse to fit together. Chrisean Rock on live, arms swinging, voice cracking like a busted snare drum, delivers her opening line, and it is not, I am grieving, and it is not, I did not do this. It is this. Karon's death has nothing to do with me. Yes, he made my life about him. Why? Because he needed money. He was desperate. That is Chrisean Rock's opening move. She attacks the dead man's credibility before the cop's question is even fully asked. Now, listen, sit on that opening move for a second, because in interview preparation terms, and Chrisean Rock has been in front of cameras long enough to have absorbed media training whether she paid for it or not, the first sentence out of your mouth in a denial sets the frame for everything that follows. Media trainers call it the anchor sentence. The anchor Chrisean Rock chose was not grief. It was not, I lost someone I once cared about. It was not even a clean, simple, flat, I had nothing to do with this. The anchor was, he needed money. A financial motive assigned to the victim within seconds of opening her mouth. And here is the part that is keeping me up at night. That framing is not random. If the dead man's entire public campaign was about a paternity claim, about a child, about a name, then painting Karon McCain as a broke clout chaser reframes his DNA demand as an extortion attempt instead of a fatherhood claim. Do you see how slick that is? Chrisean Rock does not have to disprove Karon's question. She just has to stain his reason for asking it. That is a classic character-first defense, and defense attorneys use it in courtrooms every single day. The difference is courtrooms have cross-examination. Instagram Live has a comments section full of pink hearts. Then deeper into that same stream, Chrisean Rock delivers the sentence that made every phone in the timeline vibrate at the same time. Nobody was trying to save Karon before he died, Chrisean Rock says. Because you sit over there and act like you weren't trafficking the drugs through his basement. I keep being quiet because low-key I love Karon. Wait. Read that back with me. Chrisean Rock says she loves Karon McCain, and in the same breath she tells the entire internet that Karon was trafficking narcotics out of his grandmother's basement. Baby, that is not a defense. That is a eulogy written by the prosecution. Let me unpack why that one sentence detonated the way it did, because some of y'all watched the clip, felt the chill, and could not name what you were feeling. That sentence is doing three things at the exact same time, and none of the three help Chrisean Rock. First, it is an accusation. Y'all weren't trafficking the drugs through his basement, aimed at Karon's own people, which implies Chrisean Rock has specific knowledge of the operation. Not rumors. Not chatter. Knowledge. Where she was standing, what she saw, who y'all refers to. Second, it is a confession of proximity. I keep being quiet because low-key I love Karon means Chrisean Rock had information she chose to sit on, and the reason she sat on it was emotional attachment to a man who later ended up dead. Investigators call that consciousness of involvement. Not of the crime itself, necessarily, but of the circumstances around the crime. Third, and this is the layer nobody has clocked yet, it is a loyalty flex aimed at a very specific audience. I keep being quiet is not a sentence being said to the police. It is a sentence being said to the streets. It is a message that reads I know things and I have protected people and please do not make me stop protecting them, delivered on a public stream in the middle of an open homicide investigation. And before anybody comes for me in the comments, understand that this pattern, the live as confession booth, has been Chrisean Rock's native language for years. Chrisean Rock's entire public arc, from the Blueface girlfriend era through the Zeus network era through the relationship turmoil that played out on multiple platforms, has been built on saying the quiet part out loud and dealing with the fallout later. It is Chrisean Rock's brand. In the context of an open homicide investigation, it is also her liability. Every past live is now potential context. Every old clip is now a potential exhibit. Somebody, somewhere, is timestamping. Karon McCain's own aunt, before any of this exploded, went on record telling her followers, where was y'all when Karon was out in New York, when he was on the drugs? Family closing ranks around Karon in his final months. But that quote reads completely different now, because the aunt was defending Karon McCain before the murder chatter turned into a manhunt. Chrisean Rock is now echoing the aunt's language to shield herself. Same words. Opposite purpose. That is not a coincidence. That is somebody who watched the aunt's clip and studied the vocabulary. Then there is Chrisean Rock's half-sister, Tesehki, who sat down for a podcast that traveled everywhere. If I was to speak on it, Tesehki said, it don't look too good for certain people that we know. So I'm not gonna speak on it. The Shade Room had that clip in rotation for a full week straight. Not one word wasted. Tesehki said everything by saying nothing. Now, for anybody who has not been following the Rock family saga, and honestly bless your peace, you need the full weight of that quote, because it only lands if you know the history. Chrisean Rock and Tesehki have spent years in one of the most publicly documented sibling feuds in reality television. Physical altercations on camera. Diss tracks essentially delivered through interviews. Entire arcs of their respective shows built around the bad blood. These are not sisters who cover for each other out of habit. If anything, Tesehki's track record suggests she would be the first one to speak. The second speaking hurt Chrisean Rock. So when a person with that history, a person whose entire brand includes not holding her tongue, looks into a podcast camera and says it don't look too good for certain people that we know, so I'm not gonna speak on it, you have to ask the obvious follow-up. What changed? What is heavy enough to make the loudest member of the Rock family go completely quiet? Because silence from Tesehki is not free. Silence costs Tesehki content. Silence costs Tesehki relevance. Silence costs Tesehki the exact thing her career runs on. And Tesehki paid that cost voluntarily. Somebody's interests were worth more than the footage. And listen to the craftsmanship of the sentence itself. Certain people that we know. Not my sister. Not any specific name. A plural, vague, deniable construction that lets every viewer in the audience fill in their own blank. That is not accidental phrasing. That is a person who knows the case is open, knows clips get subpoenaed, knows a name spoken on a podcast is a name a detective can underline. Tesehki gave the audience everything and gave the record absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, TMZ, doing what TMZ does, got the police confirmation itself. The investigation is still active, per TMZ, July 31, 2026, which, hold on, directly contradicts what Chrisean Rock is telling her viewers. Chrisean Rock is saying investigators told her, we know you didn't do it, you're cleared. Police are telling reporters, the case is open. Both of those statements cannot be true at the same time. Somebody is lying, and it is not the police report. Here is why that contradiction matters more than it looks. Police departments, and in Arundel County is no exception to this, do not confirm or deny the status of individual persons of interest to the press mid-case. They just do not. It is standard practice across basically every jurisdiction in the country. The case is either open or the case is closed. Arrests either happened or they didn't. And beyond that, the official line is silence. So when TMZ got, the investigation is still active, that is the maximum amount of information a homicide unit will give a reporter mid-case. It is not the minimum. Now flip it. Chrisean Rock's claim is that investigators came to see her mid-workout at the gym, which is its own cinematic detail we need to circle back to, and personally told her she's cleared. Put aside for 1 second whether that is true. Ask a simpler question. What would it mean if it were true? If detectives actually showed up at Chrisean Rock's gym to personally deliver an exoneration mid-case, that would be one of the strangest investigative procedures in modern American policing. Detectives clear people by closing files, not by taking field trips. You do not get a wellness visit from homicide. You get a knock. You get an interview request. You get a warrant. What you do not get is reassurance in a lifted weights room. So there are really only two ways to read Chrisean Rock's gym story, and neither of them is comfortable. Read 1. It did not happen the way she is describing it, and the live audience is being managed. Read 2. Something did happen at that gym. A contact. A conversation. Maybe even an interview. And whatever Chrisean Rock took away from it, or whatever she chose to present from it, got re-engineered on live into a clearance. Because here is the thing about telling your followers, the cops said I'm good. The cops will never publicly correct you. It is a claim that cannot be debunked in real time. It is checkable only by the case file, and the case file, 17 months deep, is still locked. Now let me braid this whole thing together, because separately these details look weird, but woven together they scream. February 3, 2025. Karon McCain is shot dead in Severn, Maryland. Karon had been publicly demanding a DNA test for months, insisting little Chrisean Jr., born in 2023, might be his biological child. The Yahoo Complex rundown confirms Karon was targeted. Not a random robbery. Not a stray bullet. A targeted shooting. Let me add some muscle to that word targeted, because in homicide reporting, targeted is a term investigators reach for very carefully, and it tells you more than most people realize. A targeted shooting means the shooter knew who they were looking for. It means the location was not coincidental. Outside a specific house. In a specific residential area. At a specific time of day when Karon McCain's presence there was knowable in advance. It means statistically that the pool of people with reason and knowledge narrows fast. Random violence is chaos. Targeted violence is a schedule. Somebody knew where Karon was going to be, when he would be there, and what he would look like walking out the door. Zoom out on the timeline of Karon McCain's demand itself. Through the back half of 2024, Karon was not being subtle. This was not a private legal dispute unfolding through attorneys and sealed filings in a courtroom nobody had access to. Karon was saying it on camera. On social media. In the kind of clips that travel across every gossip blog on the East Coast. Every time the story cooled off, Karon warmed it right back up. Which means two things were absolutely true simultaneously going into 2025. First, Karon McCain was the single loudest threat to the established paternity narrative surrounding Chrisean Jr. Second, everyone in the extended orbit, Chrisean Rock's camp, Blueface camp, both families, the entire fan base, every blog covering them, knew exactly who Karon was and exactly what Karon wanted. There was no anonymity left for Karon McCain. There was no quiet path. The question Karon had been asking for months was scheduled, eventually, to get a legal answer in a court somewhere. Karon McCain never lived to see that question asked in front of a judge. February 3rd took care of that. Days later, Chrisean Rock did something that almost nobody caught in the moment. Chrisean Rock posted what she called a paternity test to her son's Instagram story. The document confirmed Blueface, Jonathan Michael Porter, as the biological father of Chrisean Jr. Case closed, right? Except the document was reportedly dated before Chrisean Jr. was even born. A prenatal test from 2023. Which Blueface himself flagged the moment the document dropped, telling everyone the paperwork looked more like a legal name change filing than a real paternity result. That is the wrinkle XXL and multiple pop culture reporters kept circling. Stop and appreciate the sheer strangeness of that moment, because I think the speed of the news cycle laundered it right past everybody. The baby's father, the man who benefits directly from the document being real, is the exact person who publicly questioned the document. Think about that for a second. Blueface had every possible incentive to let that story sit. Let the blogs run with it. Let the paternity question die in the ground with Karon McCain. And instead, Blueface looked at the paperwork and basically told the internet, that is not what that is. When the person who profits from a document is the first person to flag it as suspicious, that is not drama. That is a signal flare. And let us be precise about what was being waved around on Instagram. A prenatal paternity test is a real thing. They exist. They are done via a blood draw from the mother, and they produce a paternity result before the child is born. So a 2023 dated prenatal result is not automatically fraudulent. But it raises a question that nobody on that live and almost nobody in the mainstream coverage ever asked out loud. If a paternity test existed in 2023 establishing Blueface as the biological father, why did the public paternity war continue through all of 2024? Why did Karon McCain's on-camera doubts keep generating headlines? Why did the Who's the Father storyline keep churning out engagement for another year and change if a laboratory had already answered the question before Chrisean Jr. took his first breath? Either the document was not the answer it was presented as, or a question with a known answer was kept artificially alive for engagement. Neither option is flattering to anybody in Chrisean Rock's orbit. One of them is a lot worse than the other. So let me stack the timeline one more time. Karon McCain spends the back half of 2024 chasing a DNA test in public. Karon dies in February 2025. Within days of Karon's murder, a document surfaces that supposedly ends the paternity question forever, and the document is old. It predates the child. It predates the entire fight. It sat somewhere for close to 2 years, unused and unseen, until the exact moment the only man loud enough to demand a live paternity test in a real laboratory was no longer breathing. That timing, actually, hold on, let me rewind, because I keep tripping over this. The paper existed. The demand existed. Karon existed. Only one of those three things got removed from the equation before the paper got shown to the public. That is not a sequence you draw up. That is a sequence that either happens to you or a sequence you build, which is exactly why detectives are still knocking on doors 17 months later. And here is a detail about that 17 months that nobody has properly sat with. Homicide cases go cold for all kinds of reasons. No witnesses. No forensics. No cooperation from the neighborhood. That is the tragic norm in a lot of American cities, and Baltimore area jurisdictions know it well. But this specific case does not have the standard cold case profile. The victim was internet known. Karon McCain's final year of life is documented in clip after clip. Karon's grievances are archived on public platforms. Karon's relationships are mapped across years of public posts. Detectives are not starting from a blank page here. Detectives are starting from one of the most heavily self-documented social circles in the entire reality television adjacent internet. If this case is still open after 17 months, it is probably not because there is nothing to look at. It is more likely because there is a whole lot to look at, and looking at all of it takes time. And time, for reasons we are about to get into, might be exactly what somebody in this situation needs. Meanwhile, June 2026 arrives, and Chrisean Rock confirms a location publicly, then within a matter of weeks starts telling followers on Live that she is moving abroad. "We're moving out the country," Chrisean Rock says. "We ain't gonna tell y'all the details, but we're moving." That clip lives on Hollywood Unlocked. Then, almost overlapping with the country exit announcement, a full religious pivot. Baptism footage. "Church is my happy place. Refusing gifts on faith grounds. Leaving secular music for gospel." The whole rollout traced on Chrisean Rock's own Instagram. Country exit, Christianity conversion, cooperation with cops confession, all in the exact same 6-week window. Trust me when I tell you, that is not healing. That is PR triage. Now, I want to be careful and fair here, because faith is real, and people genuinely do find God under pressure. Chrisean Rock would not be the first public figure to walk into a church when the world got heavy. So I am not mocking the baptism. I am auditing the sequencing, because in crisis management there is an actual playbook, and it is old. Step 1. Change the visual language around the client. Soft colors. Family settings. Sanctuaries. Step 2. Change the vocabulary. Fewer beefs. More blessings. Step 3. Change the geography if the legal weather starts getting hot. Any publicist in the business will tell you these are standard moves, and they work, because audiences are forgiving and algorithms are forgetful. But when you see all 3 steps executed inside a 6-week window, in the middle of an open homicide investigation, while telling a live audience that police personally cleared you at the gym, the grace red and the strategy red start to blur into each other. Maybe both things are true at the same time. People in crisis absolutely do cling to faith. People under legal threat also absolutely do rebrand. The tragedy is that one of those truths provides perfect cover for the other, and from the outside there is no instrument that can measure which one is actually steering. One more thing about the move abroad announcement, because the phrasing slips by. We ain't gonna tell y'all the details. Public figures announce international relocations all the time. That is content. That is a whole house tour waiting to happen. What public figures do not usually do is announce a departure while withholding the destination. A move is a flex. A move with the destination redacted is something else entirely. You do not hide a vacation. You hide a jurisdiction. Zoom in with me for a legal forensics beat. Anne Arundel County is Maryland state jurisdiction, not federal. Which means the feds language Chrisean Rock keeps throwing around on Live, investigators came to me, is either wrong or she is talking about a completely different agency than she is implying. If federal agents were involved in a state homicide case, that usually means one specific thing. Interstate elements. Movement of a suspect, a weapon, or a conspiracy across state lines. That is not a routine local knock. For the jurisdictional profile in the TMZ report, the case sits with local homicide detectives in a state system. Chrisean Rock keeps saying, the feds. Somebody is blurring the badge. I had to read the transcript of that live 3 times to catch that one, because Chrisean Rock says it fast, and it slips past you if you are not listening. Here is why the badge blurring is worth more than a nitpick. When a public figure tells an audience, the feds talk to me, most viewers hear authority and stop listening critically. The word does the work. But the word also smuggles in an implication. Federal involvement sounds bigger. More official. More final. If the feds cleared you, who could possibly argue? It is the jurisdictional version of name dropping. The problem is that every single report on record, including the TMZ piece that got the police on the phone, describes a county case run by county detectives in a state system. There is no reported federal footprint anywhere. So the Fed's language is either a loose vocabulary habit on Chrisean Rock's part, which is possible, or it is a deliberate upgrade of the authority vouching for her innocence. One reading is sloppy. The other reading is strategic. In this story, sloppy and strategic keep wearing the exact same outfit. Now let me pull the behavioral forensics lens in tight. Watch the deflection choreography every single time Chrisean Rock is challenged on live. Every question about Karen McCain's death gets rerouted to Karen's alleged drug use. Every question about the DNA test gets rerouted to, why does that matter now? Every question about the timeline gets rerouted to Chrisean Rock's own past trauma. It is a three-step. Acknowledge. Redirect. Victimize. On a loop. If you graphed the entire live, you would see the same triangle every 90 seconds, executed with the muscle memory of somebody who has done it 100 times before. Let me give you the second layer of that triangle, the layer underneath the choreography. Notice what all the redirects have in common. They move every question away from verifiable territory into unverifiable territory. Whether Karen McCain used drugs is a lifestyle conversation. It cannot be checked in the moment. It puts the audience in judgment of the dead man instead of the living speaker. Why does that matter now, is a philosophical shrug. It cannot be checked either. Chrisean Rock's own trauma is real, and it is hazy, and it is the one subject in the world where nobody can fact-check her at all. Do you see the pattern? Concrete question. Abstract answer. Every single time. That is not what innocent confusion sounds like. Innocent confusion rambles toward specifics and trips over them. This was the exact opposite. A stream of consciousness that somehow never once tripped over a checkable fact. 40 minutes of talking, and the record picked up almost nothing a detective could actually use in a courtroom. You can call that trauma brain. You can also call it message discipline from a woman who has spent her entire adult life in front of cameras. I have watched enough lives in my life to know which one I saw. Verbal forensics for a moment. One word. Chrisean Rock said, low-key, I love Karen. Love. Present tense. Not loved. A woman who allegedly had nothing to do with a man's death typically does not need to hedge her affection for him in real time. The tense slip is the tell. Grief speaks in past tense. Guilt speaks in present tense. That is not a rule of law. That is a rule of language. And listen, before the comments come for me, tense slips happen. People misspeak on camera every single day. I am not a courtroom, and a live is not a deposition. But statement analysis as a discipline exists for a reason, and investigators actually use it, and one of its oldest observations is that speakers betray their true relationship to a subject through exactly these tiny grammatical choices. Past tense means the relationship has ended, usually because the person has died and the speaker has emotionally processed that death. Present tense means that in the speaker's mind, something is still alive, still active, still ongoing. Karen McCain has been in the ground for a year and a half. What exactly is still ongoing? Who is that sentence still talking to? Maybe nobody. Maybe it is just a slip. But in a stream where every other word seemed to route carefully around the checkable, the one word that slipped through the routing was that one. Make of it what you will. I know what I made of it. Alright, now let me zoom out to the media landscape, because this is where the story fractures across outlets, and each fracture tells you exactly who is protecting what. Complex played it straight arrow. Unsolved. Ongoing. No arrests. Here are the facts. Clinical. Careful. Zero editorializing. Which, given Complex's history of leaning into hip-hop drama, reads almost strategic. When Complex goes dry, they are usually anticipating liability exposure. They are covering their glass. TMZ framed the whole story around Chrisean Rock's denial. A headline structure that centers her voice, not the victim, not the family. That framing choice matters. TMZ knows Chrisean Rock's clicks. Making Chrisean Rock the subject of the sentence pulls her audience in. That is not neutral coverage. That is traffic engineering. Meanwhile, the entire TikTok and Reels indication of the story leans into the streets are saying angle. That is a completely different beast. It is crowdsourced accusation dressed up as journalism, and it is where most young viewers are actually getting this story. Not from Complex. From reels that begin with, "The streets are saying," which is legally bulletproof and morally slippery. 3 outlets, 3 different stories, 1 corpse. And here is the 4th outlet nobody is listing. The Live itself. Because the single most important media property in this entire situation is not Complex or TMZ or any blog. It is Chrisean Rock's own Instagram account. Chrisean Rock is the single largest distribution channel in her own case. When Chrisean Rock goes live, she reaches more people faster with zero editorial filter than every outlet covering her combined. That is the structural shift that makes this a genuinely modern story. The subject of an open homicide investigation can now out-broadcast the investigation. Police communicate through spokespeople and press releases, on the record, with lawyers reading every word. Chrisean Rock communicates through a front-facing camera. Raw. Unmediated. To an audience primed to believe her. It is not a fair fight over the narrative. One side has rules. The other side has ring lights. Which is also why the "streets are saying" format metastasized so fast around this case. That phrasing is the gossip economy's load-bearing wall. It converts accusation into attribution, and attribution into plausible deniability. Nobody ever has to say Chrisean Rock did it. They just report that the streets are saying it, and the streets, conveniently, cannot be deposed. The result is an information environment where a 24-year-old man's killing gets processed through the same content machinery that processes album rollouts and reality TV breakups. Same thumbnails. Same fonts. Same engagement bait. And once a homicide enters that economy, the truth is not competing with lies anymore. The truth is competing with content, and content always wins on volume. The only thing content cannot beat is a courtroom, and a courtroom is exactly what this case, 17 months in, still has not produced. Now let me steelman the loudest counter-narrative, because it deserves a fair swing. The other side of the argument says Chrisean Rock is a public figure being scapegoated for a crime with no ballistic tie, no witness statement, no charging document, and a boyfriend history running through a residential drug operation in a state with active gang activity. That is a plausible universe. Karen McCain had public enemies. Live-streamed enemies. A drug-adjacent lifestyle carries risks that have nothing at all to do with paternity disputes. Fair. Scapegoating famous women for street violence is a real, documented pattern. The internet does it constantly, and it does it with special enthusiasm when the woman in question is loud, black, tattooed, and unrepentant, because she has already been cast as the villain in 100 other storylines. Chrisean Rock's entire public history, the fights, the arrests, the chaos, all of it extensively covered, means the audience walked into this story with a pre-written character sheet. It is easy to believe the worst about Chrisean Rock. But ease is not evidence. The alternative theory of the crime is not exotic. If the basement operation Chrisean Rock described on Live was real, and Chrisean Rock described it herself, which is the wildest part, then Karen McCain was sitting on top of exactly the kind of economy that produces targeted shootings without any celebrity involvement at all. Drug disputes. Territory. Money owed. A man with enemies and inventory is a man with exposure. That is not speculation. That is actuarial reality, and any honest telling of this story has to keep it on the table. But then you weigh that against a paternity document that predates the child, a public exit plan announced mid-investigation, and a sister who will not say the words but keep circling them like a buzzard, and the steelman gets thinner. Not gone. Thinner. You can be scapegoated and be shady in the exact same body. Both things can live in one person. Here is the read the press will not print, because it cannot be sourced without a subpoena. Everyone is chasing the wrong question. Did Chrisean Rock do it? Did Chrisean Rock order it? Did Chrisean Rock know? That is the wrong question, because the answer is locked in a police file we are not getting until charges drop, if they ever drop. The right question is this. What economic engine did Karen McCain actually threaten? Let me build the answer with you. Chrisean Jr. is a brand asset. That is uncomfortable to say out loud, but it is true. Chrisean Jr.'s proximity to Blueface, a rapper with active label deals, streaming revenue, and brand equity, is monetizable in ways that reach way past child support. Content. Cameos. Merch. Reality TV spin-offs. Documentary rights. Custody drama sells better than any single. Every dollar of that ecosystem depends on one immovable assumption. The last name attached to the baby. This is not theoretical economics. This model has a track record. The Chrisean Rock and Blueface relationship, in all of its documented chaos, was one of the most reliably monetizable sagas in the reality streaming era. The fights trended. The breakups trended. The reconciliations trended. Networks built programming around their orbit. Clips of their worst moments did numbers most artists' best moments never touch. The machine proved, over and over, that dysfunction between these two people converted directly into views, and views converted directly into money. The child did not enter that machine as a child. The child entered it as the final, unkillable storyline. The thing that would keep two volatile people narratively chained together forever, generating content whether they loved each other, hated each other, or never spoke again. Custody content. Co-parenting content. Birthdays. Court dates. Holiday disputes. The machine does not need them together. The machine just needs the child's last name to stay fixed, because the last name is the through line every future storyline hangs from. Karon McCain threatened the last name. Not with violence. With science. A confirmed DNA test proving Karon McCain was the biological father would not just embarrass anybody. It would detonate the entire content universe. Chrisean Jr.'s marketability collapses overnight. The Blueface storyline gets rewritten from co-parenting saga to she was lying the whole time. Every past appearance, every viral clip, every payday retroactively reads as a con. Sponsors run. Labels distance themselves. The whole Chrisean Rock and Blueface content universe, allegedly worth into 7 figures across their years of virality, implodes on itself. And the detonation would not stop at Chrisean Rock. That is the part that widens the blast radius beyond one woman's reputation. Blueface himself, from behind bars where he was serving time through much of this window as widely reported, would lose the family man storyline that humanized his brand. Blueface other relationships, Blueface other children's storylines, Blueface entire co-parenting economy gets relitigated in public. The networks that built programming around the couple have a library of content that retroactively curdles. Family members whose income depended on proximity to the saga lose the saga. Managers. Publicists. Platforms. Everybody who drew a check off the Chrisean Rock and Blueface engine had a shared, unspoken interest in one single thing. The paternity question staying a question. Questions are content. Answers are audits. Karon McCain was not threatening a woman. Karon was threatening a revenue stream with a whole lot of mouths attached to it. And revenue streams historically defend themselves. Not always with violence. Almost never traceably with violence. But with lawyers. With documents. With narrative management. And with patience. That is not motive for murder. Legally, we cannot say that. Ethically, I will not. But it is absolutely motive for silence at all costs. Motive for a paternity document mysteriously dated in 2023 to appear the moment a demand is no longer being made. Motive for a country exit. Motive for a religious rebrand. Motive for a 40-minute Instagram live that spends the vast majority of its runtime talking about drugs in a basement and about 90 seconds addressing whether a child belongs to a dead man. The industry does not murder. The industry insulates. And insulation in 2026 looks like a document, a plane ticket, and a rosary. Say it slower. This story is not about who pulled the trigger. This story is about who wrote the paperwork. Sit with that. And while you are sitting with it, one more layer, because the paperwork theme runs deeper than one document. Think about what paper has done in this entire story from the beginning. A paternity claim answered with a filing instead of a swab. A clearance from police delivered as a story told on live instead of a document anyone can request. An exit from the country announced without a destination. An itinerary that exists, presumably, as actual booked paper nobody has shown. A baptism now archived as footage. Content papered over the timeline. Every single hard question in this saga has been answered with an artifact that gestures at proof without ever actually being proof. And every single hard question that has been answered with something verifiable, the open investigation, the targeted shooting determination, the still active status, has pointed in the opposite direction. Verifiable things keep contradicting the artifacts. 17 months in, that is the cleanest pattern this story has produced. Paper says one thing. The record says another. One of them is winning the internet. The other one is winning the case file. Only one of those rooms has subpoena power. Watch how the next 90 days play out. Do not be shocked when a second paternity test, a real one, court-ordered, post-mortem eligible through Karon McCain's next of kin, starts getting whispered about in Maryland court filings. Karon's family is still out there. Karon's aunt has already gone on record. All it takes is one civil probate action from a Maryland attorney, and suddenly the 2023 document Chrisean Rock waved around on Instagram has to survive cross-examination. That is the path most likely to move, because it does not require any homicide charge at all. It just requires grief, a lawyer, and a cotton swab. Let me explain why that path is so dangerous to the existing narrative, because the mechanics matter. A civil action lives in a completely different universe than a criminal case. Criminal court needs proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the highest bar in American law, and it is the reason 17 months have passed with no arrests. Civil court needs a preponderance. More likely than not. 51%. And civil court comes with discovery. Compelled documents. Compelled testimony. Sworn depositions. Where the three-step deflection triangle does not work anymore, because there is a court reporter, a judge, and a lawyer whose entire job description is noticing the redirect. The 2023 document does not just get waved at a camera in that room. It gets authenticated. Chain of custody. Lab accreditation. Metadata. Who audited it? Who paid for it? Who held it for 2 years? And why exactly it surfaced the week it surfaced? Every question the live routed around becomes a question a Maryland judge can compel an answer to. That is why the smart money watches the civil docket in this case, not the criminal one. Criminal cases punish. Civil cases reveal. And revelation is the one single thing this entire ecosystem has been organized for 2 years to prevent. The next window is louder. Once Chrisean Rock actually leaves the country, if she does, and she has telegraphed it enough times that it is not a bluff, expect the US media cycle to reframe her overnight. Chrisean Rock stops being controversial reality figure and becomes person of interest fled abroad. That reframe alone changes brand deals, streaming metrics, algorithmic reach. Her own team will scramble to spin it as a spiritual retreat, but it will not matter. The internet has already written the caption in its head. And there is a hard-edged consequence to the international exit that almost nobody has raised. Jurisdiction. Leaving the country does not end an investigation. Everybody knows that much. But leaving changes the mechanics of every next step. Interviews that were a drive away become diplomatic negotiations. A future grand jury subpoena becomes an extradition question. Extradition questions depend entirely on which country, which treaty, which charges, if any. None of that means flight implies guilt. People move abroad for 100 perfectly innocent reasons, and celebrities do it for taxes, for peace, for content. But the specific destination Chrisean Rock declined to name is going to matter enormously if this case ever heats up, and the fact that she declined to name it means somebody, somewhere in her orbit, already knows that legal counsel does not let a client announce an international move mid-investigation without a conversation. Either that conversation already happened and the move is calculated, or the conversation did not happen and the move is chaos. Given the discipline of everything else in that 6-week window, I know which one I am betting on. Aftershock, 5 years out. This is the part nobody is thinking about yet. Chrisean Jr. becomes a teenager. Teenagers ask questions. Teenagers Google. A child raised in the wreckage of unresolved paternity, an unsolved murder, a religious pivot mother, and a father whose relevance rises and falls with prison stints, is going to want answers eventually. The internet will be very happy to provide. Whatever gets buried in 2026 does not stay buried. It comes back in 2031 wearing headphones and holding a phone with search tools better than we have got right now. Whoever wins the next 90 days does not win the story. The story belongs to the child. Eventually. The opposition, meaning that she was framed, camp, is going to fumble one specific thing. They are going to keep defending the 2023 paternity document. That is the weakest tile in the entire mosaic. Once anyone with legal training pulls on that thread inside a courtroom, the whole cloth unwinds, and you cannot out-argue a lab result with an Instagram caption. Something is going to crack. Might be a filing. Might be a family member. Might be Chrisean Rock herself on live at 3 in the morning, unable to help it. You will see it happen in real time. One last marker to watch, because the cracks in stories like this one almost never come from where you are staring. Cracks do not come from the principal. Principals get coached. Principals get careful. Chrisean Rock, whatever else is true, has survived a decade in front of cameras by knowing exactly where the lens is. The cracks come from the perimeter. The friend who was not on the payroll that month. The cousin who feels unseen. The associate who gets picked up on something unrelated and suddenly has something to trade. 17 months of silence in a circle this large, this online, this monetized, that is not loyalty holding. That is pricing holding. And pricing, in every case like this one that eventually broke, is a temporary condition. Somebody's number gets met. Or somebody's patience runs out. Or somebody's grief outgrows their check. Karon McCain's family is still out there. Karon's aunt is still on record. The demand for a real swab is still alive, and it is the one demand in this entire story that gets stronger with time instead of weaker. Because every year that passes without it is another year that looks like somebody is afraid of it. The clock is not neutral in this case. The clock is a witness. And the clock is still testifying. Alright, this is where I leave y'all. You rode with me all the way to the end of this one, which means you already know what to do. Hit that like button. Hit subscribe. Slap the bell. And be right here when part 2 drops, because the paperwork on this Karon McCain case is just getting warmed up, and I have got a feeling the next 90 days are gonna crack this thing wide open. Drop your take in the comments and let's get into it. Do you think Chrisean Rock accidentally confessed on that live, or do you think the internet is trying to bury a woman who genuinely had nothing to do with Karon's death? I want to hear all of it. See you on the next one, honey.